There's a phrase that sounds strong the first time you hear it. Confident, even admirable. I don't need anyone. I can do everything myself. And on the surface, there's nothing wrong with independence. In fact, it's something worth respecting. A person who can stand on their own, who doesn't need to be rescued, who has built a life that works without depending on someone else to hold it together. That's not a red flag. That's often a sign of real strength. But here's what you need to listen for, because the words themselves aren't the warning. It's the way they're said, and how often, and in what context. There's a difference between someone saying, I've learned to take care of myself, and someone saying it like a wall going up in real time every time you try to get close. One is a fact about their life. The other is a boundary being drawn. Not against hardship, but against you. Pay attention to when this phrase shows up. Does it come up when you offer to help her with something, and instead of accepting it, even small gestures get quietly refused? Does it come up when you try to be there for her during a hard moment, and she pulls back instead of leaning in? Does independence start to feel less like something she has, and more like something she's using to keep you exactly one arm's length away, no matter how consistent or trustworthy you try to be? This is the part that matters most, and it's easy to miss because it looks like confidence. Real independence and emotional unavailability can look almost identical from the outside. Both involve someone who seems self-sufficient, unbothered, in control. But independence lets people in when it matters. It doesn't need you, but it wants you. Emotional unavailability, on the other hand, uses self-sufficiency as protection. It's not about not needing help. It's about not trusting anyone enough to accept it, even when they genuinely want to give it. Here's something worth sitting with. Nobody actually goes through life needing absolutely nothing from anyone. That's not strength. That's isolation dressed up as strength. Every person, no matter how capable, benefits from being supported, being cared for, being let in by someone they trust. So when I don't need anyone becomes a constant refrain, especially early on, especially before you've even had the chance to prove yourself untrustworthy, it's worth asking what that wall is actually protecting her from, because it's rarely about you. It's usually about something or someone from before you. The danger isn't in loving someone independent. The danger is in mistaking a permanent wall for a temporary distance you think you can eventually close. Through enough patience, enough consistency, enough proving yourself, some walls do come down with time and trust, but others were never meant to. And the only way to know the difference is to watch, not what she says once, but what she does every time you try to get closer, because love was never meant to be earned through relentless effort against resistance. It was meant to be built with someone who, even while independent, still leaves the door open enough for you to walk through. There's something almost endearing about hearing someone say, I've never really been in love before. It can feel flattering, even like you might be the one to finally show her what it feels like, the one who gets to be her first real experience of something deep and meaningful. It's a tempting story to fall into. But before you get swept up in the idea of being someone's first real love, it's worth pausing to ask a harder question. Why hasn't she been? Not everyone who says this is hiding something. Sometimes people genuinely haven't crossed paths with the right person yet, or they've spent years focused on other parts of life. Career, healing, growth, and love simply hasn't been the priority. That's real, and it's not something to be suspicious of on its own. But there's a difference between someone who hasn't found deep love yet because life took them elsewhere, and someone who hasn't experienced it because some part of them has never actually let anyone close enough to get there. Here's what's worth paying attention to. Love, in its real form, requires vulnerability. The willingness to be fully seen, fully known, and still choose to stay. Some people move from relationship to relationship, year after year, without ever really opening that door. Not because love didn't show up, but because every time it got close, something in them found a reason to step back before it could take root. And if you don't ask the right questions, that pattern can look, from the outside, exactly like bad luck. So instead of just accepting the phrase at face value, get curious. Ask about her past relationships, not to interrogate, but to understand. Ask what happened, how they ended, what she felt during them. Listen not just to what she says about the other person, but to what she says or doesn't say about herself. Does she describe genuine moments of closeness that just didn't work out? Or does every story sound the same? Surface level, short, ended the moment things got real. That pattern tells you something important about her relationship with vulnerability itself. Because here's the truth about love: it isn't something that simply happens to people. It's something people allow to happen by staying present, by being honest, by letting themselves be affected by another person, even when it's uncomfortable. Someone who has genuinely avoided that kind of exposure for years isn't necessarily broken, and she's not necessarily incapable of change. But she may not yet know how to do the very thing a relationship with you would require her to do. This is where patience without awareness becomes dangerous. It's easy to tell yourself that you'll simply be patient enough, loving enough, different enough to finally break through where no one else could. But love isn't proven through how hard you're willing to try. It's proven through whether someone is actually willing to meet you there, even a little, even imperfectly. So if she tells you she's never really been in love, don't just hear it as an invitation to be her exception. Listen for whether she actually wants to change the pattern, or whether she's simply telling you, without realizing it, exactly what to expect. There's a moment early in getting to know someone when the conversation naturally drifts to the past. You ask about her last relationship, expecting maybe a short, honest answer. It didn't work out, we grew apart, timing was wrong. Instead, you get a story. A vivid one. He was controlling, he was manipulative, he was, in her words, completely crazy. And you nod along because that happens. Some people really do date difficult, even harmful partners. So you offer sympathy, you feel for her. And then, weeks later, another ex comes up. And somehow that one was crazy too. Here's where you need to slow down and really listen, because one bad relationship doesn't tell you much about a person. Two might still be circumstantial. But if you notice a pattern, if every single ex across years, across completely different people, gets painted with the exact same brush, that's not a coincidence anymore. That's a pattern. And patterns, especially in how someone talks about their past, tell you far more about them than about the people they're describing. Think about it logically for a second. It's statistically unlikely that every person she's ever dated happened to be controlling, toxic, or unstable. People are different. Relationships fail for different reasons. If every story somehow ends the same way, with her as the blameless victim and every partner as the villain, the math simply doesn't add up. And when the math doesn't add up, it's worth asking a harder question. Is it possible that she's not just describing what happened, but rewriting it? This is one of the clearest signs of a person who struggles to take accountability. Because real self-reflection almost always includes some acknowledgement of your own role, even in a painful breakup, a moment of, I probably could have handled that better, or looking back, I wasn't ready for that relationship either. When that kind of honesty is completely absent, when every failure belongs entirely to someone else, and she remains flawless in every version of every story, that absence should tell you something important about how she'll eventually describe you, too, one day to someone else. Here's the uncomfortable truth worth sitting with. If she's the common denominator across every failed relationship, and yet somehow never the problem in any of them, chances are high that you, eventually, will become just another chapter in that same story. Not because you did anything wrong necessarily, but because in this pattern, someone always has to be the villain, and it's rarely her. This doesn't mean every person who's had a difficult ex is lying or manipulative. Genuine toxic relationships exist, and some people really have survived painful, damaging partners. The key isn't a single story, it's the pattern across many. Listen not just to what she says about them, but to how she says it. Watch for growth, for reflection, for even a small ounce of accountability mixed into the retelling, because the way someone talks about their past isn't just history. It's often a preview of your future, a quiet warning of how you might be spoken about one day, once you're the one standing in her rearview mirror. There's a sentence that can sound like confidence at first, almost like healthy boundaries. I don't believe in compromise. You either accept me or you don't. It sounds decisive. It sounds like someone who knows exactly who they are and refuses to shrink themselves for anyone. And there's a version of that mindset that's actually healthy. Knowing your values, having standards, refusing to lose yourself to please someone else. But listen closely to what's actually being said here, because this isn't about values or self-respect. This is about refusing partnership altogether, because here's what real relationships require, whether people like to admit it or not: compromise. Not the kind where you abandon who you are, but the kind where two people with two different sets of needs, habits, and preferences learn to meet somewhere in the middle. That's not weakness. That's the actual mechanism that makes long-term love possible. Nobody enters a relationship and gets everything exactly their way all the time forever. If they did, it wouldn't be a relationship. It would just be one person's life, with someone else quietly rearranging themselves around it. So when someone tells you plainly that compromise isn't part of the deal, what they're really telling you is how this relationship is going to work from the very beginning, not through mutual adjustment, not through two people growing and bending together, but through one person setting the terms and the other person deciding whether to accept them or walk away. That's not a partnership, that's a policy. And you're not being invited into a relationship, you're being asked to apply for a position with no negotiating power. Here's the part that makes this especially dangerous. It often doesn't feel threatening in the moment. It can even feel exciting because there's something magnetic about someone who seems so sure of themselves, so unwilling to be anything other than exactly who they are. But ask yourself honestly, in a dynamic like that, what happens the first time your needs conflict with hers? What happens when you need something to change, something to bend, something to be discussed? If compromise was never on the table to begin with, you already know the answer. You adjust every time, because the alternative, according to her own words, is that you simply don't get to stay. This is why rigid, all or nothing thinking about relationships should never be mistaken for confidence. Confidence says, this is who I am, and I hope we can build something that works for both of us. Rigidity says, this is who I am, and building something together isn't actually the goal. Compliance is. One invites you in as an equal. The other quietly positions you as someone auditioning for a role that was already fully written before you arrived. And here's what's worth remembering, especially if you're the kind of person who tends to give relationships the benefit of the doubt. Real love isn't proven by how much you're willing to accept without question. It's proven by whether both people are willing to stretch just a little for each other. If she's telling you up front that stretching isn't something she does, believe her. Not because she's a bad person, but because she's already shown you exactly how this is going to go. Some people aren't looking for a partner. They're looking for someone willing to accommodate them completely. And no amount of love on your part can turn one into the other. There's a phrase that can sound almost playful the first time you hear it. I get bored easily. I need constant excitement. It might come out as a joke, a light-hearted admission, even a badge of personality. The fun, spontaneous one who needs adventure to feel alive. And on its own, wanting excitement in life isn't a red flag. Plenty of people love adventure, spontaneity, new experiences. That's not the concerning part. The concerning part is what this phrase quietly reveals about how she experiences connection over time, because real intimacy, the kind that actually lasts, isn't built on constant excitement. It's built on rhythm, on routine, on quiet nights that don't need to be impressive to still mean something. Long-term love inevitably moves through phases. The electric beginning, sure, but also the comfortable middle, the familiar patterns, the ordinary Tuesdays that make up most of a real relationship. If someone tells you up front that boredom sets in easily for them, what they may actually be warning you about is what happens the moment your relationship enters that ordinary, steady phase, the phase every real relationship eventually reaches. Here's what's worth paying attention to. Does she talk about her past relationships in terms of how long the spark lasted, rather than how deep the connection became? Does she describe leaving relationships not because something went wrong, but because things simply got too familiar, too predictable, too calm? That's an important distinction, because a relationship ending due to real incompatibility is different from a relationship ending simply because stability started to feel like stagnation to her. This matters because stability isn't the enemy of love, it's usually the proof of it. The quiet, consistent, sometimes uneventful parts of a relationship are exactly where real trust gets built. If someone struggles to stay present once the initial thrill fades, no amount of effort on your part to keep things exciting will fully solve that, because what she's chasing isn't really about you at all. It's about a feeling, the rush of newness, that, by definition, cannot last forever with any one person. This is also where you have to ask yourself an honest question. Are you planning to build a life with someone, or are you auditioning to become her longest running source of stimulation? Because those are two very different relationships, even if they look similar in the beginning. One is rooted in partnership, the other is rooted in entertainment. And entertainment, no matter how good you are at providing it, eventually runs out of new material. The hardest part of this sign is that it doesn't feel like a warning at first. It feels like fun, like energy, like being with someone who makes life feel alive. And that's real, and it matters. But pay attention to whether that energy is something she brings into stability or something she uses to run from it. Watch what happens during the slow seasons, the uneventful weeks, the quiet nights that don't require anything impressive. That's where you'll learn the truth about whether she's building something with you or simply passing time until the next spark finds her. Because love was never meant to survive only on excitement. It was meant to survive on presence, on someone choosing to stay fully, even when nothing thrilling is happening at all. There's a sentence that can slip out early in a relationship, almost casually, like it's just an observation about her personality. I don't trust anyone, including you. And because it's said so plainly, so matter-of-factly, it's easy to let it pass without really absorbing what it means. But sit with that sentence for a moment, because it deserves more attention than it usually gets. She's not describing a general worldview. She's telling you directly that even you, the person she's supposedly building something with, are already presumed guilty of something you haven't done. Here's why this matters so much. Trust isn't something that should need to be earned from zero over and over again with every new person who enters someone's life. Healthy trust works like this. You start with a reasonable baseline, and then that trust grows or shrinks based on someone's actual behavior. It responds to evidence. It's built through consistency, and it can be damaged through inconsistency. But when someone tells you up front that trust simply isn't available to you, regardless of what you do, that's not caution. That's a verdict that's already been decided long before the trial even began. Think about what that actually means for the relationship you're about to build. Every explanation you give might be met with suspicion. Every late reply might become evidence of something. Every innocent interaction with someone else might be interpreted through a lens that was never fair to begin with, because the foundation was never trust. It was doubt waiting for confirmation. And here's the exhausting truth about relationships built this way. You can't outprove distrust that isn't actually about evidence. Because if the doubt exists before any wrongdoing does, no amount of right behavior on your part is ever going to be enough to fully dissolve it. This is where you have to ask an honest, uncomfortable question. Is her distrust about something you've done? Or is it about something that happened long before you arrived, an old wound, an old betrayal, an old relationship that never got resolved, that she's now unconsciously asking you to pay for? That distinction matters because people carrying real, unresolved pain deserve compassion. But compassion for her pain doesn't mean you're obligated to spend years being punished for a crime someone else committed. Here's what's important to understand. You cannot heal someone else's trust issues simply by loving them hard enough, or staying long enough, or proving yourself over and over again. Deep, pre-existing distrust isn't repaired through your consistency alone. It requires her own willingness to recognize the pattern, to do the internal work, to actually choose to see you as separate from whoever hurt her before. Without that willingness on her part, your effort becomes a performance with no possible ending, because the finish line was never rooted in anything you could actually control. And this is the real danger in relationships that start on a foundation of suspicion instead of trust. They don't build security over time. They build exhaustion, because loving someone is supposed to feel like being met halfway, not like constantly defending yourself against a version of events that hasn't even happened yet. So if she tells you she doesn't trust anyone, including you, believe her. Not as an insult to your character, but as an honest preview of what staying might actually cost you, a relationship spent proving your innocence for a crime you were never given the chance to not commit.